The moment my father's ring finally cracked, I was 300 yards from a jackknifed fuel tanker with snow blasting sideways into my face. I was screaming into a handheld radio for a medevac chopper that had no business flying in that wind. I had no idea my face was about to hit every news screen in the country. I certainly did not know that the man having a quiet holiday dinner without me was about to watch my rescue unit on live television and drop a glass of expensive wine onto his hardwood floor. All I knew in that frozen instant was that an old man's life was slipping away inside a crumpled cab, and I was the only person close enough to stop it. 3 days before Christmas, my father called me right as I was locking up my office at the base. He skipped the pleasantries entirely and told me straight out not to come home this year. I stood there in the doorway with my coat half on, listening to the heavy silence on the line. He explained that my brother Noah was coming down with his new in-laws, and half the neighborhood was attending their dinner party. He admitted he did not want anyone bringing up my service or asking questions that might make Noah feel overshadowed. He actually said he wanted the family focus to stay on Noah's recent promotion. I stood there in the quiet hallway, feeling that familiar cold tightness in my chest that always comes right before a convoy hits a roadside explosive. That half second of pure silence before everything breaks open. I asked him if he was serious, even though a tired, bruised part of my heart already knew the answer. He gave a long practiced sigh and told me Noah was finally building something real, so he did not want any unnecessary distractions this year. I have spent nearly 2 decades dealing with stubborn brats and high-stress operations without losing my temper, but my father's quiet dismissiveness instantly made me feel like an insecure teenager again. I told him I understood, hung up the phone, and canceled my flight home that exact same hour. Years of wearing this military uniform had taught me which conflicts were worth fighting and which ones required a quiet, dignified retreat. This was definitely the second kind. My team found out 2 days later when Sergeant Vance asked what time my flight was leaving. I simply told her my plans had changed. She knew better than to pry, but she still cornered me at the motor pool an hour later to insist I join her family for dinner. I turned her down gently, claiming I needed to cover the holiday duty roster. The truth was much simpler than that. Half the soldiers in my unit had young kids, and spouses waiting for them at home after a long deployment. I did not have anyone waiting for me, so taking the overnight shift on Christmas Eve was an easy choice. By the afternoon of the 24th, a severe blizzard hit the state corridor with terrifying speed. Visibility dropped to near zero within a few hours, and our unit was activated to assist state troopers with multiple highway pileups. Pulling on my heavy winter gear inside the freezing hangar, I felt a familiar sense of calm settle over me. Out on the highway, the situation was absolute chaos. A massive charter bus carrying dozens of passengers had flipped onto its side, and a heavy fuel truck had jackknifed right behind it on the ice. I took charge of the scene immediately, splitting my small team into triage groups while fighting over the radio for emergency transport. Crawling onto the slippery side of that overturned bus, I helped lift terrified passengers out through the narrow emergency hatches. Shortly after clearing the bus, I noticed the driver of the fuel truck was still pinned inside his crushed cab, while fuel slowly dripped onto the frozen pavement. Protocol dictated that we wait for a specialized hazardous material squad, but the old driver inside was slipping into shock. I grabbed a crowbar, climbed onto the tilting frame, and spent 20 agonizing minutes working his pinned leg free while the freezing wind howled around us. I kept him talking about his grandkids the entire time, forcing him to stay conscious until I could drag him clear of the wreckage. I had no idea that a local news crew was parked near the tree line, recording every second of the rescue under their spotlight. We stabilized every single victim that night before the storm finally began to clear. When we returned to the base late that evening, I sat in the break room with a cold cup of coffee while my soldiers dried off. Someone turned on the wall monitor, and Sergeant Vance suddenly pointed at the screen with a look of pure shock. There I was, covered in snow and pulling the driver out of the burning hazard zone, while the reporter praised our unit's heroic actions. Within 30 minutes, my phone began vibrating continuously on the table with missed calls and messages from old acquaintances, military superiors, and relatives I had not heard from in years. Back at my father's house, the holiday dinner party had moved into the living room while Noah showed off his house plans. Noah later told me he was scrolling through social media when a breaking news clip stopped him cold. He turned on the television just as the national broadcast picked up the story, showing my snow-dusted face right on the main screen. My father made a light joke at first, assuming it was just someone who looked like me, until the news anchor clearly announced my full name and rank. The room went completely silent as the broadcast detailed how my unit had saved nearly 40 lives. Noah later told me he was strolling through social media when a breaking news clip stopped him cold. He turned on the television just as the national broadcast picked up the story, showing my snow-dusted face right on the main screen. My father made a light joke at first, assuming it was just someone who looked like me, until the news anchor clearly announced my full name and rank. The room went completely silent as the broadcast detailed how my unit had saved nearly 40 lives. Noah said our father turned pale, stood up so fast his chair nearly flipped, and dropped his wine glass onto the floor, where it shattered into pieces. Nobody moved to clean it up because every eye in the house was glued to the footage of the daughter they had excluded. My phone rang 11 minutes later while I was writing up my official incident report. I answered it quietly and heard my father's voice cracking as he asked why I was on national television. I kept my voice completely steady and told him I was just doing my job before politely hanging up to finish my paperwork. Over the next few days, the story spread across every major network, bringing a wave of unexpected attention to our base. I turned down most media requests, but I did accept a hand-drawn thank you card sent by an 8-year-old girl we pulled from the bus. The driver I rescued even brought his entire family to the base gate just to shake my hand and thank my crew in person. Meanwhile, my father called repeatedly and sent text messages claiming he was proud of me. But I kept my distance because I needed time to process everything. Noah also sent a long message admitting he had been completely blind to how badly our family dynamic had treated me over the years. His apology felt genuine, and it helped me realize that my worth was never defined by my father's conditional approval. Standing near the office window on Friday evening, watching the fresh snow glisten under the perimeter lights, I finally felt at peace with where I belonged. I realized that while I could not fix my broken family, I had built a real life defined by purpose, strength, and true honor.